But I want to welcome you all here. Happy Black History Month and welcome to Faithful Voices, Breaking the Silence of Suicide. My name is Joselyn Spence, and I serve as the Director of Mental Health and Wellness for the National Benevolent Association of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And as a general ministry of the Disciples Church, the NBA collaborates with leaders and with health and social service organizations to strengthen and transform communities through compassion, healing, and justice. Our mental health and wellness program focuses on creating communities of compassion and care with an integrated vision of wellness that prioritizes a holistic approach centered in justice, equity, theology, spirituality, and clinical awareness. Note that during this webinar, you may follow along via automated transcription using the AI generated captions, and you can look for that CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will also have an opportunity for questions and answers at the later part of our time together. But please, as we're moving through our panel today, our conversation today, please do put your comments, put your questions in the chat as we are moving through our time or the question and answer feature there at the bottom of your screen. As our program area prioritizes mental health justice and wellness equity for the upliftment of all people, during this Black History Month and the past Black History Month, we provide culturally relevant spaces to practice and discuss resources for Black mental health and wellness. We know that suicide is a growing crisis in our country. In 2022, suicide accounted for almost 50,000 deaths in the US, which was approximately one every 11 minutes. And according to the CDC, 13.2 million people seriously considered suicide, 3.8 million made plans for suicide, and 1.6 million died by suicide. It is ranked among the top 9 leading causes of death for individuals from the age of 10 to 64 and was the second leading cause of death that year for those aged 10 through 14 and 25 to 34. So it's clear this is something that is impacting everyone. Now, while past perceptions suggested that lower suicide rates among African Americans, that there were lower suicide rates, recent data have shown a troubling increase, particularly among Black youth and men. And these trends have challenged outdated assumptions and they call for a shift in awareness, prevention, and culturally responsive intervention strategies. There are a lot of factors contributing to this crisis. And we all know about the stigma around mental health, especially when it comes to these faith spaces. There are systemic inequities, barriers to accessing care. And at the same time, research highlights key protective factors such as faith, family, and community support can foster resilience. It's important for us to understand these dynamics so that we can break the silence as faithful voices, y'all, to address the crisis and ensure that those in need receive the support they deserve. And so here we are as people of faith joining today, as people who can provide community support. And it's important for us to have an understanding so that we can focus on the realities of suicidality in the African American community, cultural and structural factors at play, and actionable steps that we can take to provide effective, compassionate support. And so together we'll explore how to strengthen mental health advocacy, to create safe spaces for dialogue and advance meaningful change. And we pray that you come from this conversation with our wonderful panelists today, that you go forward from this moment with wisdom, wisdom that can be used in a variety of communal contexts to address suicide. Because as disciples, we are a movement for wholeness in a fragmented world. And to really be able to do that effectively, we must have an awareness of cultural realities and care. And so I'm excited, y'all, to introduce you to our panelists today. Today, we are joined by Dr. Sherry Davis Molock, who is a professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Dr. Molock teaches undergraduate and doctoral courses in clinical psychology and conducts research on the prevention of suicide and HIV in African American youth. Her work has appeared in a number of professional journals. She has served on several local and national boards. She also serves as a grant reviewer for the NIMH, NIDA, and CDC and SAMHSA. She recently served on the scientific work group that served as advisors for the Congressional Black Caucus's Emergency Task Force on Suicide Prevention for Black Youth. Dr. Molock was also awarded a focus grant from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to implement suicide prevention programs for Black youth in predominantly Black churches. In addition to her work in psychology, Dr. Molock and her husband, Guy Molock Jr., are the founding pastors and pastor emeriti of the beloved community church, United Church in Christ, in Fort Washington, Maryland. Their ministry focuses on family healing that is designed to bring spiritual, physical, and emotional healing to the community. She is the proud mother of 3 young adult children, affectionately known as the Molock Jewels, Amber, Jelani, and Diara, and the proud Mimi of Michaela and Aliyah. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Molock. We are so happy and honored to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Whenever you hear someone introduce you, you always wonder, who are they talking about? Because it's not me. But thank you all so much for inviting me to participate in this really important program. It's good to see old friends as well. Everyone here is it's an honor for me to be a part of this distinguished panel. So I'm not going to delay any further. I'm going to go ahead so that we can all have enough time to talk about it, what we came to talk about. And I'm going to talk with you all a little bit about the program that Joselyn mentioned called Haven, which is our youth suicide prevention program for Black youth and Black churches. And so let me make sure can you all see those slides okay? Good, okay. So this is the Haven Connect Suicide Prevention Program. And Haven stands for Helping Alleviate Valley Experiences Now. It's a comprehensive depression and suicide intervention for youth designed to be integrated into Black churches. And Haven Connect has 3 components: church engagement, faith-based curriculum via sermons, Bible studies, and Sunday school, and a suicide depression intervention specifically designed for Black youth. So the first component is church engagement. And so basically what Haven Connect does, I think, really well is we partner with faith communities or with churches in the community. We develop these partnerships. Sometimes they're with connections that we've already made in other avenues, but oftentimes it's not. And we consider ourselves to be equal partners or sojourners who connect to local churches. We go talk to the church about the program. If they express an interest in participating, we then meet with the pastors of the church and youth leaders, and we identify what we call a church champion. This person is really critical because they serve as a liaison between their church home and the rest of the team. And so without the church champion, none of this would even happen. The church champion is designed to kind of walk us through what are the ins and outs of doing a program in the church. This person also helps make sure that we have youth who are engaged in the training, and to make sure that we're also training adults to work with the youth. So we set those trainings up, and then we also provide what's called a faith-based curriculum for pastors to deliver a kickoff service sermon. So I'll talk about that in a minute. So we are currently doing this in 12 churches in New York State. We have 6 churches in Rochester, New York, and 6 churches in New York City. We are in our second cohort of churches in Rochester, and we're in our first cohort of churches in New York City. We also did a pilot study of this with funding from actually New York State Department of Health and Human Services, specifically with their suicide prevention office, our community partner. So this is one of our community partners in Harlem, First Corinthian Baptist Church. where the Reverend Michael Walren is the pastor. Dr. Lena Green was our church champion, and she's also the executive director of the Hope Center. And one thing I love about Haven Connect, we can tailor the program to your church. So with First Corinthians, we embedded it in a program that they were already doing. They actually had funding from Nike. So this is some ideas for you all who are in church. You can partner with different organizations, including corporations. They had partnered with Nike to do a program called Thrive, which they were implementing through the church's nonprofit center. They have a nonprofit called the Hope Center, which already does mental health programming and provides short-term counseling. So they had a huge kickoff event. They highlighted mental health challenges for youth, and they talked about the 4 cores in the program. And the pastor, Dr. Walren, did a sermon about anxiety. This is a church that's pretty well resourced, and so they had a very sophisticated launch. They did their own flyers. Brenda, you would love them. They did their own video. So this is a partner that Samson would love because they had all their own material. And so we just basically had to come in and do the program. So I think I bring this up only because this is an atypical kind of launch. Most churches don't have the resources to do something at this scale, but they did. This was our second partner during the pilot study, Rochester First Genesis Missionary Baptist Church, where the pastor was Reverend Frederick Johnson. Um, their, they decided to do all of their programming in sessions, in person, excuse me. And then they did the sermon after the actual program was implemented. And then last but not least, we had partners in Albany, New York. This is again during the pilot, Macedonian Baptist Church, where the Reverend Michael Poindexter is the pastor. You see here the picture in the middle, that's Reverend Poindexter with the Black Excellence shirt on. The church champion is to my right, which is Deacon Greg Owens, and then Reverend Daryl McCullough and Amita Joshua. They were with the staff with Haven, and they were the persons who actually did the training there. So this church is a church that we remain in contact with. They did a kickoff sermon, but the pastor is very innovative. He did podcasts for not just the youth of the church, but also for youth who had gone on to college. So that was the way that they implemented that. And we're still working with them, trying to figure out how we can sustain the program there. All right, next we're going to talk about the faith-based curriculum. So the faith-based curriculum is a condensed form of a class that I taught at Howard University School of Divinity for their seminarians, which was called Depression in the Black Church. And so that semester-long course was condensed down to a 90-minute session with me, where we do an educational overview for pastors and youth leaders on mental health education, risk and protective factors for suicide, and the course from the Youth Connect, which is the actual suicide prevention program, which are protective factors which will help to buffer against depression and stress. And those 4 cores are kinship, guidance, purpose, and balance. In a minute, I'll talk a little bit more about those in detail. The faith-based curriculum also provides pastors with the tools to integrate mental health knowledge, risk and protective factors for suicide. And those 4 core concepts into sermons, Bible study lessons, Sunday school lessons, and youth programs. So these are examples of sermons. This is me preaching at my own church, what we failed to notice from Psalm 91. This is Reverend Poindexter. His sermon was entitled Big Help for Big Battles, which came from Isaiah 41, 8 through 10. And then notes from a second site, which was Reverend Walren at 1 Corinthians, which came from 2 Kings 6, 11 through 17. So people have lots and lots of flexibility and leeway of how they prepare the sermon. We do ask that those 4 core concepts be in there, and then something about suicide prevention. But other than that, each pastor kind of promotes this and addresses it from their own perspective. And then last but not least, we have the third component of the program, which is the Youth Haven Connect. So we meet with churches and young people. The training focuses on strengthening skills to grow and sustain these 4 core or protective factors. Kinship, which is developing healthy bonds, not just with your family members, but also families that you create. Guidance, which is support from mentors. Also, giving young people information about accessing medical and mental health expertise. The sense of developing a sense of purpose. And a big thing here is teaching young people that it's okay not to know your exact purpose and that your purpose changes throughout your life. So for them not to be so stressful if they don't know exactly what they're going to do, particularly those who are about to graduate from high school or make the shift from middle school to high school, that it's okay that you can be exploring different things that you do and that your own purpose changes from time to time. And also with your sense of purpose and recognizing you're not the only one who may be struggling with this issue also promotes a sense of belonging. And then we talked with young people a lot about balance. It's something we adults also need to, right? To engage in self-care and to utilize your support systems. So the youth participate in three 90-minute, highly engaging interactive modules that have specific learning objectives and activities, which includes eliciting personal goals, reasons for engaging in the existing community group. I should also add that some of the young people who participate in the program are members of a particular church, but some of them are not. Some of them are actually members of the community who either youth leaders, pastors, or the young people themselves invite them to participate. We just ran a program last week with a new church, and they had kids who just came to hang out, and they ended up joining the group. And so that's fine with us. And so we almost doubled the group because of that. So we definitely want to promote, you don't have to be a member of a church to participate in this program. We introduced the four cores as protective factors that promote resilience. We talk about ways to strengthen each core and balance. And we also extend the learning into the natural environments. We ask the kids to practice and think about ways that they can take what they learn into the sessions, into their regular everyday lives and communities. And then in between sessions, the sessions are held once a week. In between sessions, we send the kids motivational texts between sessions. So the way this is implemented, small group leaders are recruited from churches, and the small group leaders who basically we have breakout sessions for each of the sessions, breakout groups for each of the sessions. They receive a total of 10 and a half hours of training to help them run the small breakout groups. We also have a smaller component, an abbreviated component for adults who are just interested in working with youth. So they have the same program, but it's condensed into 2 hours. The pastor does the kickoff sermon, which starts everything. So the programming doesn't start until the pastor does the sermon on mental health issues and that focusing on those four cores. Some churches do adopt Bible study lessons as well. One of the churches we're about to enter into a relationship right now, they're going to have an entire series, and our Haven Connect program is part of that series. So they'll be actually running programming for about 3 to 4 months, and we will be involved with that on different levels. And then we'll have key informant interviews. As Jocelyn said during the introduction, we did receive funding to expand this to 12 churches from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We're in the midst of doing that right now. These are my collaborators, Dr. Sydney Hankerson at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City, Dr. Peter Wyman, the University of Rochester School of Medicine. And I always want to acknowledge Jay Carruthers, Dr. Jay Carruthers, who's the director of the Suicide Prevention Center for New York State, because he gave us the seed money to do the pilot study. I want to acknowledge all of the participants who worked and also the staff who worked so diligently on this project. This is my contact information, and thank you for your attention. I'll turn it back over to Jocelyn to introduce Brandon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Molock. That sounds like a wonderful program for people to be able to implement. And one of the first, things that come to mind is if people want to have that type of partnership at their church, what would be the first step towards that?
Well, would be to contact one of us so we can talk to you about implementing it. We're not gonna put it into any other churches except New York right now because we need to make sure it works. But we are definitely talking to different churches now about this, and so I think we definitely want this to go nationwide. And it's a program that I think is very easily adapted into what you're already doing in your youth ministries, and it's designed to be done that way. So a lot of this is not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but how can you integrate this into what you already do? And different churches do that differently. Some people could do this as Vacation Bible School, for example. Some of them can do this as a youth initiative, a revival series. There's different ways you could do it.
Okay, thank you so much. Um, for those who are watching this right now, who are with us online right now, and those who will be watching this later, I definitely encourage you to be thinking about some of the things that Dr. Molock shared that can be implemented, even if you are not. At this time, they're not having the program available to other churches while they're moving through assessing the program now in New York. Some of the things that she mentioned, you may be able to do, right now, right? Thinking about how you integrate some of these pieces when you are engaging your youth in your churches or, your community organizations connected to your ministries. Yeah. So thank you so much, Dr. Molock. I'm sure we will have more questions and engagement, but I'm gonna move to introduce Brandon. Today we also have with us Brandon J. Johnson. And Brandon is an advocate for positive mental health and suicide prevention services for youth and adults nationally and within the city of Baltimore, Maryland. He is a subject matter expert in suicide prevention with a particular focus on suicide prevention planning and suicide prevention strategies for Black youth. Brandon earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Morgan State University and a Master of Health Science degree from Johns Hopkins University. In 2020, Brandon earned the Certified Health Education Specialist credential from the National Commission for Health Education Credentialing. Brandon is the creator of the Black Mental Wellness Lounge YouTube page, which provides tools, resources, and conversations around Black mental health. Welcome, Brandon.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for that, Jocelyn. It's really an honor to be here. I appreciate the invitation. Before I even get started, we got to give flowers to folks who really kind of paved the way. If we're talking about Black History Month, we really got to talk about folks who have paved the way for us to be here. Dr. Sherry Molock is a friend and a colleague, but she's a pioneer. Dr. Molock's work is Black history. And so I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing in the position that I'm in to do this work without her laying the foundation for this. And so before I even get into anything, I want to make sure to give you your flowers today here publicly because I appreciate you so much. And so let's get into it. What I really wanted to do today is to talk a little bit about how we've gotten to this point in Black youth suicide. It's been such a journey here and get into some of the practical pieces that we have. Like Dr. Molock talked about her intervention, and I wanted to talk a bit about some of the resources that exist and to be able to talk about what are some of the practical things that we can do really to help Black youth when it comes to Black youth suicide prevention. So this has been a lane of mine for 12 years at this point. And just really excited to see where things have been able to go. Knowing that this can be a tense topic, I wanted to make sure to provide the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in case anyone during this conversation, things can be triggering with some folks. And so I just wanted to make sure to put that resource there. You can call, chat, or text it there for you 24/7, even if you have any challenges after this presentation. And also putting this disclaimer out there as well. I'm representing the Black Mental Wellness Lounge, not any other capacity that I'm in today. So I really wanted to get into this first and talk about where these resources are, kind of how we got here in Black youth suicide prevention, really because I think the journey of how we are in the position now where there are more resources now than ever. There are more interventions like the one that Dr. Molock talked about. We have more information and knowledge around Black youth suicide than we ever have. And so wanting to really kind of articulate that journey first and foremost. Really, unfortunately, as Jocelyn so eloquently put in the beginning of this session, really kind of laying the groundwork for this. Unfortunately, we've been seeing increases in trends that really have been troubling for us in Black youth suicide. We've seen a number of increases, particularly in our younger folks, and so there was information that came out that was published in APHA journal quite some time ago that really looked at the trends of Black youth suicide deaths increasing, particularly in Black youth between the ages of 5 to 12. This landmark study really kind of was the thing that propelled a lot of the conversation in Black youth suicide on a grander level. I always make sure to acknowledge that because there were folks, again, saying this, Black professors and researchers that were saying that these were increases, but it really didn't catch on with society until a bit later, which is unfortunate, but it's something that can, happens often with, some issues that are particularly in our community. Um, we also saw increases in self-reports of suicide attempts among Black adolescents, particularly Black girls. We saw significant increases there based on CDC data that we were seeing since 2009. I want to shout out Dr. Michael Lindsay, another pioneer in this space who has worked a lot on that data and those trends increasing as well. And so we're seeing these increases, and at the same time, we're also seeing that mental health utilization in our community for Black youth and young adults remain particularly low. We know there are systemic issues and other things that contribute to that, but we've definitely seen these things kind of go side by side. And so getting into this, and the reason I put this here is really that this was the thing that was the catalyst that started to produce some of the amazing resources and things that we have today. And so Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman was the out of New Jersey, was the person that developed and created the emergency task force on Black youth suicide and mental health, which I believe, Dr. Molock, you were a part of that. Yes, you were a part of that group. She was watching NBC, and that data point that I just had came up, and she was inspired to do something, to act, to get engaged with this, and so that created the Ring the Alarm report, the crisis of Black youth suicide in America. It is still online. I encourage folks, if you're interested in this, to really take a look at this resource. And as a part of that, in the appropriations bill that year, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman also commissioned a report from the Department of Health and Human Services on Black youth suicide, which was titled the African American Youth Suicide Prevention Report to Congress. And this is also public. And both of these really start to address, where's the data? Like, what's the data telling us? What are we seeing? What's happening with our Black youth, and really kind of launched and started this work here. And then from there, these are the two most recent reports and information and issues, reports around Black youth suicide. So the first one is Answering the Call: Policy Academies as a Tool for Black Youth Suicide Prevention. This is on the Suicide Prevention Resource Center's website. So if you go take this title, and I'll be more than happy as we continue to put all these in the chat. But this resource talks about a practical way to develop an intervention that will help with suicide prevention planning. So creating a strategic plan for a state and a community to address Black youth suicide, with all the things that we've been learning about this topic. And again, if you're seeing a theme here, Dr. Molock was also a part of that and a part of that initiative. And then we have this issue brief here, which is on SAMHSA's website, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration website. And this issue brief gets into everything that we know currently around Black youth suicide prevention, and particularly with a lens towards clinicians who want to get engaged and work in this space as well. So the Ring the Alarm report came out in 2009. These were released both in 2025. So we're seeing this trend where we're addressing Black youth suicide, and it's really an exciting time to see so much focus and attention on this. So we're seeing these resources, but what are the resources telling us to do? Where can we have impact? Where can we have intervention? And I'm pulling out a couple specific things that were in these documents that really give us a roadmap for what we can do to support our youth. One consistent thing that is around all of those resources, throughout all of those resources, is really creating these communities for young people to share and be active and learn. One thing, and I should have mentioned this in my intro, but I gotta shout out my church, Morning Star Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland. I've worked on the youth ministry there since I was in college, really working with young people. And what they always say is that, they want those times for connection. They want us to talk and share about that. And faith-based places, faith communities are really an opportunity for us to do that. And one thing I've also learned about our young people is that they're not ashamed to talk about this. A lot of the stigma that comes from talking around mental health, unfortunately, comes from us older folk who may not feel comfortable enough to have these conversations. Building these spaces is something that youth themselves are talking about and wanting to be engaged in. So, what else will we see from these documents and in the literature? These are supportive and protective factors for Black youth that we've seen across these spaces. So having peer support, relationship with culture and ethnic identity is an important one that I feel that we can do and that we've seen it be successful. That we've seen us talk around where we come from, instilling those values into our young people. They want that connection and want to be able to learn about those things, and they're often not given an opportunity. I have two children, 13 and 11. So y'all pray for me, y'all faith folks. I need y'all to pray that them teenage years are already rough. But in that space, what we've learned is that we aren't able in the position to wait for school systems to do that work. They're not in the lane of doing that anymore. When I grew up, went to Baltimore City Public Schools, we did Black History all year. There wasn't just February. February, we just did even more of it, right? It was something ingrained in us. And so our young people are missing that, but they're craving it. And we know that this is a protective factor for suicidal ideation in our young folks. So focusing on that, spirituality and religiosity, which brings many of us here to this conversation today. Things like Dr. Molock's intervention in Haven can really be a big piece of this. And also, again, connecting them with the skills to navigate the things that they experience, including life on social media, where I tell adults all the time, if the solution is for young people to get off social media, we're probably not going to be successful. So how do we give them the tools and the things to manage being on social media and the things that come up as a part of that? So that last bullet says safe spaces developed by youth. And I want to talk about that being a critical aspect of this work. And so in the most recent resource, we talk about policy academies in that one. And so the Black Youth Suicide Policy Academy, you'll find in that document, really was an approach to bring states, a multidisciplinary team together to address and learn around Black youth suicide. And so this piece also included young people. Young people were on the planning committee. Young people had to be in attendance from the state. Young people had to give their ideas and what they wanted to see as a part of this. So anyone who's interested in developing something for Black youth, for mental health and supports and things like that, make sure that the young people are involved and engaged with this. These things that you see here on this slide all came from Black youth who've experienced suicidal ideation or made suicide attempts. I would love to say that I edited this to make it sound, really good, that I took their ideas and kind of crafted it. This is directly from them. And so wanting to, emphasize the space of a lot of the answers and a lot of the things that our Black youth want to see, they have ideas about. They have things that they want to see. They have ideas about what they want to do. And it's important for us to give them the space to do that. So you see so many of the things here on this chart, and they really talk a lot about having forms of self-expression like art and dance and things incorporated into what they wanted to do, music, developing music, playing an instrument, all those things they thought would be therapeutic as amongst the other things that you see here. And I want to really kind of wrap up with this quote that came from a young lady that we were working with as a part of some of this work. And she said, "If you let us, we'll tell you everything you need to know to help us." And I think that was a really critical thing for us as adults as we're building these spaces for our young people to really understand that they have to be a part of the solution as we build these pieces out. So quick shameless plug, Black Mental Wellness Lounge is a YouTube page. that has typically we have a youth suicide prevention week that has resources and interviews with folks who are engaged in Black youth suicide. So with that, again, happy to take questions as we get further along. Excuse me, but I appreciate the time and the opportunity to share some of the things that we've done in Black youth suicide.
Thank you so much, Brandon. I'm just putting your YouTube channel in the in the chat there, so
Appreciate it.
that people can go directly there and check that out, subscribe, and take in what resources Brandon and his folks are putting together there. You said a lot of wonderful things, and one that's really sticking with me is that slide where you had those responses from the young people, and that education on emotional regulation.
Hmm.
And, just thinking about some of the things that they may not be getting in schools. I know a lot of schools now are doing more research and integrating mindfulness practices and those things, but not everywhere. And it brings to mind for me, how some of our congregations, I know on our in our folks who are watching us today and who will watch this later, our leaders across the church and have the ability to bring forth some of those ideas and ways that you may be able to engage the young people there in not only offering some resources, but also having them be a part of designing aspects, even if we think about aspects of the service and how young people may want to feel when they're in the space, and how that connects to mental health and wellness is so important. So thank you for all that you shared. Much more conversation to come. So yes, thank you, Brandon. All right, and I'm just gonna double check. No, anybody has any questions or comments, again, please drop those in the chat as we are moving along, so that we can bring those up. Even if you have ideas, and you want to run those by this panel of experts that we have with us today, please do put that in the chat. So we're gonna move to our next panelist, Lauren Jenkins. Some of you may know Lauren from being a part of one of our keynote speakers at our Mental Health Professionals Conference last October, and so we're grateful to have her back with us today. Lauren is a trauma specialized mental health clinician, empowerment speaker, mental health and suicide prevention advocate, and trainer. She has over 20 years of experience providing therapeutic support to youth and adults involved in correctional and mental health systems. Lauren also has extensive experience facilitating professional development and training for public sector and community organizations in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. She is a certified mental health first aid trainer for youth and adult through the National Council for Wellbeing, a master trainer in adverse childhood experiences through ACE Interface, and a certified facilitator of various trauma-informed and cognitive behavioral trainings. Additionally, she is a certified soul shop trainer, offering faith-based suicide prevention workshops to support leaders and congregations ministering to those impacted by suicidal desperation. Lauren works at Anchored Hope Therapy, a trauma-specific private practice in Annapolis, Maryland, where she specializes in supporting individuals and couples through life transitions and helping professionals face vicarious trauma, burnout, and compassion fatigue. As an advocate, Lauren serves on the board of directors for the Life of Joy Foundation, a faith-based nonprofit fostering holistic mental health. In 2021, she launched the Journey to Well LLC to empower people to rediscover their courage, reclaim their narratives, and share their stories to live, feel, and help well. Lauren's work is deeply personal. Her journey with mental health challenges, suicide loss, and her own struggles with suicidality, culminating in a suicide attempt in 2012, became the catalyst for her healing and inspired her to pursue professional and advocacy roles in mental health and suicide prevention. Welcome, Lauren. We are so glad that you are here with us, and I mean that in multiple ways.
Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here. And I got to shout out someone who I know is on the webinar. I see Takia Blackman already putting something in the chat, the founder and executive director, co-founder of Black People Die by Suicide. Hey, I'm honored to serve on one of her committee members. and as one of her committee members. And so I just wanted to shout out that amazing organization. And I'm excited and honored to be here today. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm going to come from a little bit of a different lens and kind of, I don't want to say minimize or bypass some of the statistics. So I'm so honored to be on this panel with Dr. Molock, who also, as I am a soul shop trainer, was a part of the originator of the curriculum. And so just so honored to be here. And of course, Brandon Johnson and the work that you do. I'm going to shift a bit. I want to talk a little bit about, faithful voices from the position of raising awareness by telling a little bit of its connection to my own story. I am grateful for the capacity I serve in as a professional, and from lived experience, we know that suicide does not discriminate not only by socioeconomic standards, statuses, or racial. It goes beyond, race, but also professional. And so I want to talk a little bit about that too. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start. So really quick, this is me. And I'm so honored of the bio and information that Joselyn shared. And I kind of intentionally had it in this space in the green, owner of my business, trauma therapist, mental health and suicide prevention advocate, right? But beneath the surface, which I think is important when we talk about breaking silence, I think there's power in normalizing sharing all aspects of our story. I believe that our stories matter and they help open and unlock the opportunity for others to share. And when we begin to share, I truly believe we can make a difference. And so, yes, in addition to professionally, those aspects of my story, I am a survivor of suicide loss and a survivor of suicide attempt. And which really served as the catalyst of making me a change agent for this work, particularly not only for professionals, but also individuals from my community, my Black community. I have this quote that I live by, which is, I want to be the change that we wish to see in the world. And so before even going into a little bit more depth about how we, for those who have joined this webinar, trying to gather resources and ways to help and support your communities, your respectable faith-based spaces, I want to invite you and challenge you. How do you want to be that change in the world? What ways are you doing that now? And what ways can you begin to think about how you can become more integrated and a part of the work that we're sharing is so needed? Your voice matters. Your presence matters. And so again, I thank you all for being here for that. So again, not going to read this because I want to really get into some strategies that we can really work on to supporting, but numbers don't lie. Brandon talked about it. Dr. Molock talked about it, right? We are seeing an uptick in regards to the impact of suicide on our Black communities. Specifically, a lot of times when we talk about suicide, we talk about mental health. And so statistics tell us that about 25% of African Americans seek treatment compared to other racial groups like white Americans, 40%, right? And there's so many factors that contribute to that. However, the other part that I want to identify here is that about 46% when it comes to suicide, that individuals who die by suicide, there were known to be mental health illnesses connected. So that leaves the other 54. And there is this reality factor that talks about the impact of desperation. And so I do want us to really acknowledge that yes, there's a strong correlation of suicide and mental health or mental illnesses. And there's also this other factor about what I like to call, or we call, quiet desperation. And so as already identified from 2018 to 2021, there's been research that shows that the racial group that saw the largest increase of suicides among especially young people ages 20 to 24 were Black individuals with an increase of 37%. And then also, as Brandon had already talked about, our young people experienced the largest increase in suicide rates by 78%. One thing I thought was also interesting when we talk about quiet desperation is how do we get there? And so according to the Association of American Medical Colleges, they talk about nearly 40% of Black youth had a relationship crisis with a boyfriend or girlfriend, family member, or friend before their suicidal death. and 30% had an argument within 24 hours of their death. And I thought that was alarming, yet also, what do we do to help in some way, create a space, create a connection to be able to support? And before answering that question, as I mentioned, I am a soul shop trainer. I just wanted, for those who are not as familiar of the statistics in comparison to the general overview of the impact of suicide on America, being able to see it in context in comparison with our Black community. And so in America, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death right now. The second leading cause of death for ages 10 through 14. And then you can see here, about 54 Americans have been affected by suicide in some way. And in general, 70% of suicides in America are middle-aged white men. However, if we look at specifically the impact on our Black communities, Black girls have risen by 182%. Suicide rates amongst Black girls have risen by 182% between 2001 and 2017. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, I believe Joselyn talked about it, but 80% of our Black suicides are Black men. So young people, youth, and our young Black men are at the highest area of being impacted. Black youth are 2 times more likely to die by suicide than their white counterparts, and Black youth are more likely to make attempts that require medical attention. And particularly, one of the research is showing that while we are still seeing an uptick, lowest rates of suicide are amongst older Black women, yet suicide death rates for men, Black men, are 3 times more likely than Black women. And so I just want to capture that and highlight that. And so we do have, this is significant. And just shouting out, I didn't say yes from the DMV. I am from Maryland. I'm also connected with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But more importantly, just wanted to kind of give it in context for those who are in that DMV area. In addition to suicide rates we talked about, the other piece is that we're also seeing a lot of deaths in relation to use of firearms. So I did want to highlight that. But let me slow down just for a moment before I get into the piece about the professional and my own personal story. I think it's really interesting to take a pause, and I'm grateful for the research and all of the information that is moving forward. I know historically during the pandemic, there was a lot of information that talked about seeing some levels of a decline when it came to suicide, but particularly for our Black communities, we actually saw the numbers increase. And so Johns Hopkins Medicine research found that suicide death rates increased dramatically amongst Black Marylanders, particular in the first wave of COVID-19. I think by 94% between 2017 and 2019. And so I'm really grateful that we have a space today in this webinar that we're identifying that we need to have this conversation and that it can't be silenced. And so while we see the impact in our community, we also have to think about the impact it has on those who've been called and trusted to be that light and that beacon of hope. And just as I said, it does not discriminate against socioeconomic statuses or anything. We also know that pastors have increased rates of suicidality. We know that helping professionals have been susceptible. And so the thing I want to share here is that when I first started in this work, I never understood, especially working in corrections, law enforcement, the impact of suicide. When I first started, I was a counselor in high security prison for women. And the way I actually got my job was that my predecessor had died by suicide. And while I was in my position, I was serving as a counselor. I was serving in my ministry. I was married to ministry. And all in one period of my life, I lost my uncle to murder, my childhood best friend to suicide at age 25, and my marriage. My husband at the time decided to start a family without me. And I share this in the sense of saying that somebody who was equipped, someone who had the knowledge, experienced this place in this moment of desperation and could not find the ability to find hope in the midst of what I felt like was the world tumbling down. And I couldn't put language to it until later on 2022 when I first got introduced to an organization I'll talk about a little bit, Soul Shop. But I was able to have friends, shout out to Dr. Jamie Fields, who's on here, who's one of my best friends and just one of my anchors, but they were able to be my borrowed hope until I could find it again. And so as you're sitting here on this webinar and you're hearing the information and you're hearing the programs, and if you connect to some aspect of the story I shared, someone who's a professional that people come to all the time and who experienced a moment of quiet desperation, right? What do we do? The other question I want you to think about is, as you've been called and lead to pastor your church, right? How many people in your community, it's not if, but when, have been impacted by suicide? And just to put that in context, definitely over half of the congregation has been. And so what do we do? How do we begin to respond to that? Well, I always believe that awareness is the first step to sustainable change and liberation. And there is power when we can raise awareness, where we can begin to create space for people to be seen and to be heard and to find hope and connection. And so I just want to offer, just for this moment, I say is a practical strategy. There's a whole university, I think University of Oklahoma, Tulsa, that has a whole hope research center that talks about the power of hope as a strategy for us to be able to explore how to begin to navigate this. The beautiful thing about hope and connection, and shouting out Soul Shop for Black Soul Shop, I'm honored to be a trainer for this, is that we really communicate the power of cultivating spaces where no one loses hope and no one is alone. And I invite you in the chat to think about the power of hope and connection in that way. I invite you in the chat, or those who are attending, to think about who were those people that when you think about moments, those are the people that, you know what, I'm grateful that they were my hope. I'm grateful that I could connect with them. And so that's something I invite you. And as I mentioned about the Hope Research Center, they define hope as the belief that the future will be better and you have the power to make it so. Hope is based on three main ideas: desirable goals, pathways to goal attainment, and agency or willpower to pursue those pathways. And as I shared, in a moment of my life, I could not access that, no matter how much training, matter how much schooling I had. And I was honored that people could be that borrowed hope for me until I could find it. Hope is believing that change is possible. And I love this, if folks are familiar with Brene Brown. Connection. Connection is another piece. Connection is that energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they can give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. And yes, programs are important. They are, and that is exciting. And I want to speak to the person who's like, well, you know, budget-wise and all these things. Well, here are two practical strategies that we can begin to start brainstorming. How can we, in our faith-based spaces, be hope and connection? Because research says that when people experience hope and connection, healing is possible. And most importantly, for many, for some, living is also possible. So one of the stories we talk about when we do our program, our workshop, Soul Shop, we talk about the impact of suicide. I love if you are not familiar with Soul Shop, we'll drop in the link so you can get familiar with it. I'm not going to necessarily read all of this, but I think it's important to understand that in faith-based spaces, the story of suicide goes beyond Judas. And so the thing about it is hope and connection can meet people in quiet desperation. And that's why we bring this up. I love the story about the jailer and Paul and Silas. He was there on his job. I'm paraphrasing. He was there on his job. He'd been comfortable in it. And then unexpectedly, life changed. And in the moment when he recognized that his livelihood, all these things were going to be jeopardized, he was going to fall on his sword. And where we see the manifestation of hope and connection was when Paul Paul yelled out, "Fear not, do not harm yourself. We are all here." And what if we can be that community in those faith-based spaces where we can do that? That is something I just wanted to invite us to think about. Because for me, in my story, I was ready to die. And I was grateful in that space. There were people who could step into that role and do that for me. And so that is something I just wanted to bring up and to share. If we can begin to look at building practically within our communities and our faith-based spaces, hope and connection, where the way we create space for individuals is where they do not lose hope. We can be their borrowed hope and that no one feels alone. That is a way to do it. Some way we can do that is creating spaces for sense of belonging. Brandon brought up many different strategies about how we can provide protective factors. One of the things, especially in our Black communities, is our culture, our history is such a significant component. You know, I think about what we call the Black National Anthem, lift every voice and sing. James Weldon Johnson talks about sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Our culture is rooted in an element of faith. But I also love the part where it says, sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. And so I think that's powerful. Another way we can be hope and connection, right, is helping people see access to support. So not just having mental health resources or programs, but having access to it, making it accessible. And of course, being able to help individuals connect to at least one positive support is also another factor that we can explore. Finally, before I transition, I just wanted to show this picture. Those who've been called to be hope and connection, it is a beautiful visual. This is actually a real place in Vietnam. It's called the Golden Gate Bridge. And I love this picture because it shows these really large hands holding this connection for people to walk across. And that is the work that I and many of us are working and doing. And if you look closer to those hands, they are worn. They have cracks. They have growth, right? Overgrowth, right? And so I also want to say the best way we can also help our community take care of us is we got to make sure we take care of ourselves. There's a quote that says the expectation that we are immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. And so one of the things I encourage folks is that as you begin to think about, I'm sorry, yep, thank you so much. As you think about it, I know I'm went over, so I'm trying to hurry up and go back, but as you think about helping people, I really want you to make sure you help yourself. I've been honored and tasked to now serve as the co-director for Soul Shop for Black churches. But in my own company, the last thing I wanted to offer you all is that I do have a self-care toolkit, inviting folks to be able to use resources, find tools to be able to support you in this work in suicide awareness and prevention. And also, I also would like to just serve as a resource as well. So I thank you all for listening. I apologize if I went too far over, but thank you all for being here and thank you for the great work you do.
Thank you, Lauren, so much. Powerful. Every time that I hear you share your story, that I hear you share your resources, it's always powerful. And I'm just so grateful. Again, as I believe Brandon put it in the chat, grateful for your vulnerability and being that model of a leader who can share what they have experienced and how you moved from there to be able to support and care for other people and encourage them on their own journey. And we'll please, people, again, if you have comments, if you have questions, please continue to put those in the chat. Very much related to this theme of leaders who are experiencing suicidality, leaders who are experiencing challenges with their mental health. Or I love that you pointed out, maybe somebody does not have depression, but there's this sense of desperation. We've seen statistics around loneliness go up and how that might impact someone, even if they don't have a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis of something that's impacting them. And so for us to remember that Um, but I'm going to invite Cameron on to share a little bit now to close us out. Just around some pieces on when we're thinking about our leaders and how our leaders may be feeling. And so Cameron Cunningham, he serves as our mental health and wellness program coordinator. He is a dedicated clergy, religious educator, and social advocate with a strong commitment to building faith communities and advancing holistic and social equity. His work is driven by the belief that faith can serve as a catalyst for creating and nurturing strong, unified communities. He brings exceptional dedication and meticulous preparation, working at the intersection of faith and mental health, as he has collaborated with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration and the National Institute on Drug Abuse to further enhance his expertise in addressing mental health and substance use disorders within faith communities. And those of you who are here and have met Cameron over the past couple of months know how excited I am to have him on my team now and to not be doing all of this work on my own. And so welcome, Cameron, to close us out here.
All right. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And it is so good to see our fellow panelists today. Always a pleasure to share space with Dr. Molock and Brandon and Lauren, who I've learned so much from through work and your contribution and your impact work. So thank you for even the space to share this space with you today. I want to share very quickly, and I know that we're tight on time, so I want to make a deposit today around healing the healers. And I want to share some current mental health and wellness trends around and among clergy. And I find this to be extremely important because the clergy, faith-based leaders are oftentimes the first touch or the first lines of defense, frontline workers, but oftentimes clergy, pastors, faith leaders, and even lay leaders have some real pressing mental health struggles that also need to be addressed. Lauren, you said it so eloquently. Suicide, self-harm, emotional distress, unfortunately, do not discriminate. And they certainly affect those who lead churches just as much as those who support them. So the emotional weight of ministry, the calling, the moral responsibility faith leaders carry can be immense. And for too often, it's expected that that weight be bared in silence at the expense of personal mental health. So again, we all know that healers need healing. So want to just share a few current trends and things that I was able to come apart to present today. But to do so, I want to, and Dr. Molock, thank you so much, frame this conversation around a brief 1 minute clip from an NPR that was just published actually this past Saturday, February 22, with Michael Warren Jr., who Dr. Molock told us is a partner of hers at First Corinthian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York. That is where the Hope Center lives, Healing on Purpose in Evolving, which is a center designed to offer free mental health resources to the Harlem community through actually licensed clinicians and evidence-based practices. So listen to this just 1 minute clip and then I'll move forward.
Any pastor's job is to offer emotional support through things like rituals, empathy, prayer. But there can still be stigma in churches around clinical mental health care. And Katia Riddle brings with this profile of one pastor in Harlem who was battling stigma within his congregation and leading by example. And a caution, this story discusses suicide.
Mental health was not something that Michael Walrond thought about much as a kid.
And I grew up in a traditional West Indian Caribbean household. It definitely wasn't talked about.
As an adult, he committed to a life of service and became a pastor. He got a Master's of Divinity degree, but he didn't get much explicit training around mental health. Then, in his late 30s, he found himself in a crisis.
I had an experience out of nowhere where I had a suicidal ideation.
Suicidal ideation is a kind of fantasy about dying by suicide. It can be an indicator of a serious illness.
I didn't realize I was dealing with depression and anxiety.
Research shows pastors have a disproportionate amount of these kinds of mental health issues. But Walrond says there's a stigma around talking about this occupational hazard. After his crisis, Walrond started going to therapy. He says it saved his life.
And I remember realizing that, you know what, if this has been such a critical impact on my life, I know other people may be suffering in silence.
Okay. So thank you. That interview, it underscored the importance of mental health support, especially within faith communities. Because again, it is clear that faith leaders, pastors, are not immune to mental health struggles. In fact, recent research from Barner actually sheds light on the mental health challenges that clergy face, and I have to say those numbers are quite concerning. They're not just numbers. Let me actually correct myself. They represent real people, individuals who have dedicated their lives to guiding others, yet still grapple with their own mental health challenges. So while most pastors express a desire to improve mental health, they also sometimes navigate these challenges alone. So I want to share just two brief things that I notated and want to just bring to your hearing. The first is, according to Barna research, study shows that nearly 1 in 5 U.S. pastors, that's 18% of this poll study, says that they contemplate self-harm or suicide in the past year. So this is not an isolated incident. We know again that pastors are not exempt from mental illness or even emotional distress. Studies show in 2015, polled pastors, 46% says they expressed depression. 5 years later, at the end of the pandemic, that number had risen until 59%. So these statistics are sobering, and it's important to note that clergy need help as well. This is so troubling because our pastor survey, 80% say they've considered suicide, self-harm within the past year. And while some say that these feelings are fleeting and not so severe, it still remains the fact that 18% of pastors, individuals who have been called to care for others, grapple with these deep, painful thoughts. So just want to notate that for us today. I'll round my presentation here. Key insights about what's putting pastors at risk for mental health challenges. Um, Barna shows that there are two major ones, and according to Barna, the data reveals several key insights, but the main two is loneliness and isolation. So pastors feeling that they're isolated, they're alone in their ministry, they're more significantly susceptible to experience thoughts of self-harm or suicide. 26% of pastors who report feeling isolated have also considered harming themselves. So again, I just hope we see the importance of the sense of community and connection as critical for clergy and pastor mental health. Another dynamic is the financial stability. So this right before us shows that pastors who are paid full time are oftentimes less likely to report thoughts of self-harm or suicide. So again, what is the relationships with the social determinants of health and also tangible security and stability? For some, it could just be a steady paycheck, and how does that alleviate some of the pressures? And then also stigma in faith spaces as well. So I'll round out by saying ways that we can address mental health struggles faced by our clergy. Establish peer networks. Design intentionally spaces where clergy can come together with other clergy and really fight against the stigma of being judged or being an outlier or being a wounded leader who's scared to bleed on the people. So, what does it look like for faith leaders to find affinity among each other? Again, mental health resources and training. So making sure that there is training for clergy, because once you are trained at what mental illness may look like, you may be more susceptible to identifying that when it shows up in your own life as well. Open conversations about mental health on all levels. So again, in sermons, in Bible studies, in small groups, in even messaging on the screens, 988 slides of announcements, things like that, but making your space a brave space to have conversations about mental health and even suicidality, and then self-care and boundaries. Faith leaders are oftentimes always on, that they're never off until the burning issue is burnout. So actually putting up those spaces that are boundaries and then allotting time and space for self-care. And I'll close today with this quote from Mike Walren. Again, Pastor Walren says that physical needs are spiritual needs. The needs of the people are holy, or should be seen as holy. And then he wraps out that interview by saying mental health is holy. So I'll leave you with that note today, that mental health, specifically within clergy, still remains a holy practice. Thank you for the time to share.
Thank you so much, Cameron. And we will definitely have opportunities to dig deeper into some of the pieces that Cameron shared across the rest of this year. A lot of statistics and a lot of needs. And so I'm checking our chat. I don't see any questions here. But as we, come to a closing space, I definitely want to open up to the panel one more time. If there is anything else that you feel like our participants who are with us today, those who will continue to watch this as we post it on our YouTube channel, is there anything else that comes to mind that we want to make sure people know, especially when we think about, biblical, theological, cultural, communal frameworks, understandings, tools? If there's anything else, we'll close out with you all being able to share that briefly.
Jocelyn, I do have one. You know, when you put slides together, sometimes you like everything looks good until you're talking. And then you like the one thing I definitely should have brought up, I didn't bring up. So I'm putting this into the chat, but this is a resource that was developed with the blurred thing keeps messing it up. But it was created in partnership with the National Action Alliance and the Partnership Center for Faith-Based and Community and Neighborhood Partnerships. And this resource is specifically called Hope, a guide for faith leaders to prevent youth suicide. And it really has information, from a faith perspective across all faith communities around what we can do to kind of help our young people more broadly. And one of the things where we did with this is that we wrote pieces around like, what do you do if a young person comes to you saying, I'm having thoughts of killing myself, but also what do you do if you recognize it, right? If you're recognizing the young person isn't saying anything, how to approach that. And to Cam's great presentation, at the end of it, there is a section around self-care for faith leaders where it talks about many of the things that Cam was talking about and giving practical things for faith leaders to do to take care of themselves. And so that's the only other thing I wanted to add. This is such a great space, and so many of us are called to do this work. We're positioned and passionate to do this work, but that doesn't make the work any easier. And I think we got stories across the Bible that tell us that the work isn't, typically doesn't get easier, right? It's a hard thing. It's labor that we're connected to for a greater reward, and so just wanted to reemphasize that point of, as you're helping and pouring into other people, to make sure to pour into yourself as well.
Thank you, Brandon.
And I'd like to add to that very quickly, just in regards to how you can support. I love Cameron's presentation, and even when the host interviewing the pastor talked about where in their training of becoming clergy in their master's level, there was not specific training related to mental health or suicide prevention. And so I'm just reiterating the power of getting trained. We hear some amazing models, but we also have other ones through American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We have ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, mental health first aid, and of course, Soul Shop for leaders, for Black churches, for communities. Just honored to be doing that great work. And so I put the website for Soul Shop Movement in the chat. And so get trained.
That's
Only thing
good.
I think I would add, sorry, real quickly, is this work is challenging. Don't do it by yourself. Takes a village, takes a team. And I unfortunately am aware of clergy who also have attempted suicide, and some have died by suicide. And Black clergy in particular, we are so used to being one-stop shopping where everybody comes to us for everything. And I'm here to tell you, in the 21st century, you can't do ministry like that. You really got to do a team approach and learn how to talk to each other honestly and stop perpetrating the fraud.
That's good, Dr. Molock. Stop perpetrating a fraud. Be honest. Build those networks. Thank you all. Cameron, did you have anything else you wanted to note?
Dr. Moloch, that's a good place to end. So I'll let us end on that note.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Man, what a full time that we've had this afternoon. I just want to thank again our guest panelists, Dr. Molock, Brandon, Lauren, Cameron. We are so blessed by your work. We're honored to have received your wisdom, your expertise, the professionalism, the work that you all have put in from your schooling to your personal experiences. We are so grateful. We pray that you will continue to be blessed in your work, and blessed in your personal lives as you continue to do this work to keep communities well. And I pray that we will be able to continue to collaborate over time so that we can all do this work together, as Dr. Molock said. To our attendees, thank you for being with us this afternoon. Please join us next month on Thursday, March 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern for our Mental Health Sunday workshop. Mental Health Sunday is observed on Sunday, May 18th. And our workshop next month will be a panel of disciples, pastors who have led Mental Health Sunday services. MBA will also be hosting a Mental Health Sunday service on the evening of May 18th. And so we'll get some more information out to you all about that. Also, look out for our submissions opening for our Mental Health Awareness Month campaign. During the month of March, you will be able to submit your response to the question, where do you see God in your experiences navigating change and navigating your mental health and wellness individually and collectively? We're excited to share those submissions during Mental Health Awareness Month. As it has been noted, this webinar is recorded. It will be up on our MBAcares.org website, as well as on our YouTube channel. And we can make sure that we get that link out to you all once it is posted. We'll follow up with you all with some other resources as well. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, please do go to our website. You'll see a link there for newsletter and check off that you're interested in mental health and wellness. Finally, if you would like to partner with us financially, you can also do that on our website, mbacares.org/donate. So now that we got all of that out of the way, thank you again for being here. A blessing for you as we leave this space. May you remember to center your mental health and wellness and set your boundaries so that you can be well. May you be supported by your community for sustainable care that relieves desperation and fosters an increase in your well-being. May you be empowered to advocate for justice, especially in these days. May your mind, body, and spirit be replenished each and every day. And may you remember that God wants you to be well, not just so you can serve and be used, but because God loves you, God sees you as good, God wants to gift you with rest. Grace and peace be with you all until we see each other again. Thank you for being here.